everyone, and welcome to the Political Job Interview, where I interview candidates running for election. I'm Vincenzo Calla, the host, and today I take on the role as the boss, giving a job interview to today's candidate, Tessa Franklin. Tessa is running for election for Ottawa City Council as a candidate for Ward 1, Orléans East-Cumberland. Thank you, Tessa, for your time, and thanks for joining me today.
No worries at all. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and let's get this started. So as with any good job interview, I'm going to start off with an opportunity to learn more about Tessa. So first question, Tessa, is can you tell me a bit about yourself and your story?
Of course. So my family moved to Ottawa first when I was 2 years old, so I don't have much recollection of that part. And then when I was four, we moved to Rockland, which is a community very, very close to Ottawa. We are actually if you lived on the left-hand side of the road like us, you were considered Rockland. If you lived on the right-hand side, you were considered Ottawa. So I joke sometimes that I had dual municipality citizenship because I went to school in Rockland, but if you were buying groceries, you're going to extracurriculars, you're going to see friends, you were always going to Ottawa. Eventually, in 2016, I moved to Ottawa itself to pursue a career in the music industry. I did that for several years. I worked for the concert promoter and organizer Spectrasonic. I got to bring all kinds of artists to Ottawa. I had a hand in bringing Nathaniel Rateliff, Tegan and Sarah, Lisa LeBlanc, lots of cool people. But I also spent a lot of time focusing on our own local talent. And I was really lucky to see groups like Bearings grow from playing basements to doing sold out tours across North America, which is awesome. After I left Spectrasonic, I got involved with advocacy work for women in the music industry. So if I'm not campaigning or doing other household stuff, you can usually find me talking to MPPs about how we can help women in the music industry and how we can stop some of the egregious behavior that happens in the industry. And that's pretty much me. I grew up in the area, come from a military family, had a pretty typical upbringing.
So why have you decided to run for this position? Like, what brought you from the music industry into running for city council?
That's a good question because I ask myself that sometimes. When I worked in the music industry, although we did, focus a lot on bringing those big touring acts to Ottawa, we were still very involved with the community, whether it was things like we would do fundraisers for bird sanctuaries, which sounds very random, but bird sanctuaries are important. Or working with the community, with those independent venues and independent businesses and independent artists that really make our city. And we also dealt a lot with municipal bylaws. And a lot of times for us in the arts industry, it feels like we're working against the city instead of with the city, which is a bit upsetting because, we do bring a lot in terms of, tourism and economic investment to the city, but it feels like we just go unheard. We're just in the background. They don't consult us on projects or big things like Club Saw, where they're going to invest. They don't even call us to say, what would be the best way we could do this, right? And I was always a very politically involved kid. Whether it was volunteering on campaigns or later in my life doing advocacy work. So it just felt like a natural progression, even though it doesn't sound like it on paper. It does make sense in the grand scheme, I think.
Let's take a bit of time to talk about the job of counselor and what you bring to it. So I wanted to ask you, what experience do you bring to this job? And when I ask about experience, some of that experience that's important to being a counselor, what do you bring to it?
I think I have a good perspective of especially small businesses in the city. I have only ever worked for small businesses. That's all I've ever done. I've been there doing the financials, which is not fun, and connecting with the community and making a business work, which is not easy for a small business. Depending on where you are in Ottawa and what you're doing, it can be very difficult, and we tend to leave our small businesses and our rural and suburban wards behind. And so that's some experience I feel like is really good to bring to that, as well as I've mentioned, experience in the arts. We have people who we would call music counselors, and while they're good people, they haven't actually worked in it. They don't know what goes into to actually making these events happen. And how we can really improve conditions for the people doing that in our city and how we can really benefit those groups in our city. I think those are two big things I bring. Outside of that, and the more like technical stuff, I've been around on political campaigns and I've done things, so I've seen it from the other side, right? Which I think is always it's a good tool to have in your toolkit going into it.
So I wanted to ask you now, what sets you apart from the other candidates who are running in your ward?
I think we're a very diverse group. There's only three of us, but I feel like we're a very diverse group up in Orleans. But I feel like one big thing for me is with the ward redraws, not every ward, but especially out in Orleans, we had quite a few redraws. We're bringing in areas like Cumberland, which are areas of the city that since amalgamation have felt neglected. Neighbors have told me, you know, what makes you different in the sense that are you going to care about us? Because we feel left behind by everybody who's come before since amalgamation. And for me, that it hits very close to home because that's where I grew up. Those were the markets I went to growing up, and that's where my friends lived. And so it hits close to home. And I feel like that's something that really sets me apart. And as well, just lived experience. I think I've had a pretty chaotic life. I've done a lot of things. I've experienced a lot of stuff. And I've also gone through a lot of these systems in our city. So things like the Veterans Task Force or Services for Victims of Crime and Victims of Abuse. I've gone through those. And so I know where the gaps are and where we're having issues because I suffered because of those gaps and those issues. So I think that's something that I haven't seen, provided a lot of candidates across the city show that kind of side of themselves. But I think it's important that we have people running who have experienced that and who can bring that to the table, because it really changes how you view, especially our social programs, when you've had to live through them. It's interesting.
Part of serving as an elected official is serving the people who elect you. So a few questions now about how you want to serve the people. The first one being, what's something that the people you would like to serve need that you want to get done if elected? And by the people you want to serve, I know you're a part of Orleans, but if you even want to expand upon Orleans, I know Canada, Barkman, Orleans, we're split up, but we're a greater community at most. So talk about Orleans if you want as a whole.
I think so. I'll do both. I'll do a little bit specific, then a little bit grander scheme. But specifically, a big thing we struggle with in Orleans is transit, and I don't even just mean OC Transpo. I mean across the board. A lot of our infrastructure is aging, and it's not keeping up with development. There's a lot of development going out east through Navan and Cumberland, where we are pretty close to Rockland. We're fully out there, and people are relying on sometimes gravel roads, just gravel roads, roads that are cracked, potholes, have no sidewalks. Or we have the great experience of Innis and Trim, and these are roads where if you actually shut down part of Innis for a day, it would just bring the whole community to a halt. Nobody could get anywhere really without, wreaking havoc in every community around it. So infrastructure investment is going to be a big one. We haven't gotten as much as we need, and now it's piled up to the point where we have to do serious investment because it's the only option. As well with that, things like reimagining our park and rides. The reality is for our neighbors in Cumberland, they don't have bus service. They have one bus that will go there during your 5 working days. They don't go there on the weekends, and the bus only goes there twice a day, one pickup, one drop off. So those folks are using park and rides. And until we're getting transit out there, we need to accept that we need park and rides, but we're building them out instead of up. It's taking up a lot of space in our community. As well, bus service in general. Since the launch of the LRT, for many neighbors, it now takes 30 minutes longer for them to get to Blair, which defeats the purpose of the LRT entirely in that situation. So until we have our LRT stations out east, we need that. We need stronger bus connections, and we need routes that serve the community. It's So Innis, and everybody talks about Innis. Everyone out east is always saying something about Innis, and I think I mentioned it 3 times now, but it is a problem, right? Our buses will drop you off a solid 10-minute walk away from a grocery store, which, it's rough. If you're a senior, you don't really want to walk 10 minutes to Walmart. It's not great. It's also not safe for anybody. The intersections are extremely dangerous. And then you've got to weave through these parking lots where sometimes there's crosswalk, sometimes there isn't, sometimes there's sidewalk, sometimes there isn't. And we've seen a lot of issues with pedestrian death in the East End, people on bikes, people on foot. So reimagining our streets in a way that potholes are not there, people can drive on them, people can bike on them, people can walk on them, and our buses can get through is a big priority. Right here, a lot of our priorities are really infrastructure issues. Grander for the city. Now, this is a fun, exciting stuff. I really, really, really would like to make it a reality that we can have events anywhere in the city. We can do that, and we actually have a lot of venues that can service that. For example, in Orleans, the Schenkman Arts Center. The problem is it's so expensive for independent promoters to get in there. It's not happening. That's why most events are at places like the Bronson Center or the 27 Club, because it's the only thing independent promoters can afford. To book somewhere like Schenkman, you would have to either be the in-house promoter or you would have to be Live Nation and just have so much money you can spend whatever you want. So things like grants and incentive programs to allow our local promoters, which there are plenty of and they're very good at their jobs, to actually bring those shows around the city, whether that's in Orleans or Canada, because the cultural and the economic benefits for that truly pay in dividends.
Definitely. And as somebody interested in the arts myself, I mean, through high school, I was in the drama programs and the plays and all that. Just the need for more arts-based culture in the city, in our parks, in our communities is just so great, and it needs it. Just there's a need for it. But I wanted to continue on that point finally to the last question, which is, what is one accomplishment that you have achieved that demonstrates why you'll be a good elected official if the people choose you?
That's a good question. And also one, I think there's a lot of different things I could say. I do sometimes joke that working in the music industry is like the boss battle. Like I did that, so now I can really do anything. But I do think to some extent that is true. I think you know, it's hard work balancing those kind of books and working with the community like that, especially when, we're not given the preferential treatment that other companies or other sectors might get. And despite that all, we still did it. And despite the fact that I had a less than savory experience in the industry, I turned that around and said, okay, that sucked, but I want to make it so that no other woman has to go through that. And I think having the drive to do that and having the knowledge to do that is something a bit unique, and it's weird to say that I'm proud of myself for that, because it's always weird to say like, yeah, good job, but I do think that's a real good way to look at the kind of person I am and my character and how I can take situations and make it work, because admittedly and I think even all small business owners to some extent feel this and their employees, but it's never a perfect situation. And I think that's kind of similar with a lot of the motions we see at City Hall. It's never something that pleases everybody. It's never the perfect way. It never has enough funding, or it has too much funding, or this, that, or the other thing. And it's figuring out how to make it work. A lot of the times with our social services and such, we're just trying to make it work on as little money as possible, which is extremely difficult and requires a lot of engagement with the community and involvement with the community, and that's something I kind of picked up over the years that I hope, if elected, I could bring to the table and bring to neighbors here in Orleans.
Thank you, Tessa, for joining me today. It was great having you, and I'm sure the viewers have really enjoyed hearing what you have to offer to them. Election day is October 24th, And if you liked hearing what Tessa Franklin had to say and live in Ward 1, Orléans East-Cumberland, you have the opportunity to vote for her on election day. Check with your local election officials for more details. To stay updated, make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at VC Productions25. Check out my website, VincenzoCalla.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, and choose to get notifications here on YouTube. The Political Job Interview is a VCalla production. So until the next video, I'm Vincenzo Calla, signing out.